Hi, everyone. Good morning. Let me start my video here. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone. Buenos dias for those speaking Spanish. My name is Sergio, and I have the pleasure to be here with the Barcelona Technology School, showing you, presenting you how to survive the Tech Lead Talk. So it's 11 a.m., so we will start. If someone joins afterwards, we'll have to catch up. As Juan, my sidekick here, put on the chat, feel free to put any questions that you want answered or to send something over the chat, and together we'll strive, we'll do our best to answer those questions. So first of all, my name is Sergio. I've been taking Chief Technology Officer and technology management roles for quite a few years, over 15 years now, both in the startups and the small companies and big corporates alike. Rakuten, the big Japanese e-commerce, is one example. Senior, one of the leading marketplaces for digital content. And now Naviga, where I'm taking the role of CTO as well. So basically, my role has been for the last years to manage technical leads, to manage directors of engineering, and to coordinate and mentor people who wants to take the next step on the technical side. And who are you typically? This talk is mainly target for those of you who either have been promoted or are interested on a promotion like this and on a leadership position on technology. However, pretty much everything that we're going to discuss here is applicable to any other role within a company. If you want a leadership position in marketing, sales, a product, you name it, most of the topics that we will discuss today are pretty much the same. So I have three basic goals that are going to be summarized on the key takeaways from this presentation. And I understand that this will be on YouTube later on, so you can stop, pause, and do anything you want with it. The first of all is understand that a promotion in this line is not it's not just the next step, like when you move from junior to senior or to staff engineer or to a more senior position. Is more a horizontal change where your day-to-day, your mindset, everything changes. So that's the second point. The mindset change that you need to do in your own brain to move it from an individual contributor over to a leader and get the big picture and make sure you focus on the right things instead of micromanage and all these things that we typically hear about. And then I'll just showcase some methods and frameworks that are helpful to me and most of my peers. Of course, there are hundreds of methods out there, and you can do your own research, and your toolbox is something that you will have to start growing and creating yourself. But of course, it's easier if you start with something with some scaffolding to start with. And yes, as I've said, please ask questions. I want to make this session ideally as much dynamic as possible. Of course, I don't see your faces on the video, and we need to put some order on the conversation. So use the chat to ask the questions and to stop me anytime you want. So I would like to in order to modify a little bit as we go the webinar, know a little bit more about you from all our attendees, and use the chat if you want alongside the presentation as you go. Please let me know whom of you are already a manager, someone who leads a number of people. It can be 2 people, it can be 200, it can be 2,000. Who has become a manager unwillingly, and by unwillingly I mean you got a promotion that involved managing people, but what you wanted was the promotion and not necessarily the people part. And who is struggling with the position? Now, I understand that this third element, the answer is everyone. And if you are not struggling with a manager position, you're lying. So everyone will be kind of struggling with a people role, because especially when you come from engineering, when all you have is code typically is deterministic. If something fails in your software, it's typically going to be your fault. But when you go over managing people, then things are not deterministic anymore. We have emotions, we are human. We have good days and we have bad days. So in that sense, this mindset change I was mentioning before is mandatory for this. So I will assume that everyone is struggling with the position, and potentially the reasons you're attending this conference is because, well, you want some ideas, or you would like some ideas on how to do that. So okay, I see some really good answers here. I want to start with some reality that happens in many countries, and luckily is actually changing. So you are an individual contributor, and you hit a ceiling on top of you. You cannot grow anymore as the biggest expert on some technology, skill, or you name it. So the only way to get more responsibilities or increase your salary is to get a management role. In software, this was the typical case for the last 30 years. Once you are an architect, the only way to continue growing was to become, to get a role in product, or a role in pre-sales, or basically become a manager. But what if you don't want to become a manager? What if you don't want to lead people? Luckily, many companies now are realizing this situation and creating two different branches of career ladders where you can continue growing on an individual contributor level, being the most skilled person in a company about one specific technology tool set or anything like this. But if you want to become a manager and be a people, to get a people role, and you can switch to the other branch. This is not the case for all companies, but more and more companies and corporations are starting to take this approach from the human resources and from the C-level executives to implement it. And the nice thing about it is that you can switch from one to the other. Some of the comments I'm saying, if someone is really struggling on this position and wants to take a step, not down, but a horizontal step to an individual contributor role, that should be definitely possible. Now, today we're going to focus specifically on the leadership roles, because those are the ones that we tend to struggle. But again, feel free to ask questions on that side. The good thing is that I say that most people here are already managing people, so we should have some nice conversations. So let me start from the very beginning. What is a tech leader, or a leader in general? So the tech leader, and when every part I say is software, just put your skill set or your tools or your specific knowledge that you would need on your vertical role. A tech leader is a software engineer, someone who's deep down in the technology, someone who knows how to code. Okay, I see some questions now. I'll answer them quickly. Perfect. Awesome. So I see people that are managing a handful of people, a few dozen. So that's great. Thanks, Juan, for letting me know. Sometimes it's difficult to keep track of the questions and the speech at the same time. So a tech lead is a software engineer, meaning that you will be managing something between 1 and 10 people at the same time. But why I say this amount of people? I strongly believe that nobody, absolutely nobody, can humanly manage more than 6 to 8 people at the same time, because otherwise you cannot create rapport, you cannot connect with your people. Of course, then you can have different organizations, and you have directors. From the directors, you have engineer managers, and you have more managers, and you can have under your organization 3,000 people if you want. But your direct reports should be something below 10, if you want to keep some sanity in your head. And you will see why as we go through the conversation. But the main thing on this specific role, on this specific mid-manager role, is that you are an engineer. You're someone who was in a hands-on role, and you are now responsible for leading a development team, but not to do the deliverables themselves. The tech lead is a team manager. He defends, but also creates performance. So he's both responsible of the efficiency of the team, but also the biggest defender of the team. The analogy I used to take is that you are the one on the door with the shield towards one side and the whip towards the other. Now you have to make sure you put the whip and the shield in the right direction, so otherwise you will have a problem. And the tech lead is the right mix, the perfect mix between a software engineer that has also architectural skills that can look in the long term for the technology or whatever implementation you want to do, but also leadership skills. You're not just the individual contributor that is coding things or who is drawing boxes or who is actually doing the delivery or the deployment. You're the one leading the team to get the most out of your people and achieve that. Now, this is what is a tech lead. And again, if you take the definitions of the leadership parts, you will see that it applies to everyone. But the second question is, why do we need tech leads? So take a typical organization that is growing and start having different teams and different people around. The more people you have in your company, the more complexities you will have in terms of communication, coordination, and getting things together, alignment, basically. You will have people with different agendas, different objectives, and in some cases that's like a tug of war type of game. People pulling away in different directions. I'm sure all of you have faced similar situations. This not only happens between business and technology teams, as we tend to think, this dichotomy of product and business. This also happens within engineering teams. Say the backend developers who develop APIs and the front-end developers who are the users, the stakeholders of what this first group creates. So we need to make sure we create some nice flow of communication between these teams. So without this kind of organization, especially when this is very common when a startup starts growing, right? And a startup gets momentum in revenue or gets investment, puts a lot of people in the same room, they hire a lot of talented, smart engineers, but they lack direction. They have the skills, they have the capacity, but lack direction. So the communication flow starts going like this, and someone goes there and asks this, and someone goes there and asks this sort of thing, and it becomes a mess. So when it's time for any executive or anybody in the company or any client to get value out of this, it's extremely difficult. It's extremely complicated to say, what are we going to do next, why we're going to do it next, and what are the dependencies across each of the teams. So the tech leads are the ones who sit inside any either functional or vertical team, it doesn't matter, and make sure that this information flows properly top down, bottom up, and horizontally across team members. And they're the ones creating autonomy for the team. So people like me, the CTOs, can basically do nothing and sit on their hands every day. A proper mature company is a company that's driven by those tech leads and by those managers, because what engineers want the most: autonomy and mastery and purpose. So these tech leads are going to be the ones making sure that this individual unit of work, this small group, or as Jeff Bezos would say, the two pizza teams, or have everything they need to perform, are responsible for what they have, and they have ownership of the products they manage, and they do have all the tools they need. So they are kind of the gatekeepers for the team. As such, the key tasks would be make sure that there is alignment with the team, but also cross teams. Make sure that there is technical vision and the knowledge grows continuously. So everyone in the team, both the junior and the senior developers, have something to dream for. They manage the risk of the team, whether it's technical debt, whether it's making sure there is no knowledge silos. For example, this is a specific tool that only John knows how to do and how to fix. What are we going to do when John goes on holidays, or God forbid, when he leaves the company? And as I said, cross-team sync. So those things are extremely important. I have one question here. When talking about tech lead responsibilities, what is the relationship with the product managers? This is very specific to each company, but the way I like to say it is that the tech lead is, as I've said, the defender and the mentor of all the engineers. And the engineers have autonomy and mastery. Therefore, they are the ones who decide how we do things. Well, the product managers or the product owners are the ones who decide what we do. So the product managers are the ones who are typically in touch with the client every single day, or the stakeholders, the data that shows us how our users are behaving with our technology or our product. And the technologists are the ones who are all the time um, in touch with the technology and knowing what we can do, how we can do it the best way, and how we can create efficiency. Now, a good question is, how do we link those two things together? Make sure that we are aligned. There are many frameworks out there, many ways of using it, but the autonomous team I mentioned, this team here, the product owner is inside this green circle. Actually, on the next version of this slide, I'll make sure I put a profile image for the product manager or the product owner. So those two guys are the ones who decide together what we do and how we do it. Now, a second point that you could imagine is, how can we drive innovation from technology? If this team is really a cohesive team, and that's responsibility of the tech lead, they could come to the product manager and say, look, I know we have this roadmap, we have to do all this, but if we were to use this technology or try this thing here on a spike, on a proof of concept, maybe we can get this much value out of this. And they discuss and decide that together. When they are aligned and agree with that, maybe even across teams, is when they go to the CPO and the CTO and say, guys, let us do our job. Let us make the best thing for our customer. And this is our plan. That is when magic happens. I hope I answered your question. So those are the key tasks of the tech lead. So the first takeaway for today is that becoming a technical lead or a lead in general is not a vertical change. It's actually a horizontal one. It's a complete role change. It's like you are a software developer and suddenly you go into marketing. It's something like that. And it's not, the common mistake is imagine that you're a senior developer, a staff engineer, and the next natural change is to become a manager. And that's a big mistake and what burns out most of engineers that go into management positions. So don't believe that this is just getting more technical responsibilities. On the contrary, and we'll see why as we move forward. This is actually a question that I receive very often when talking about tech leads or when advising companies. Where should I spend my time? Should a tech lead keep coding? And the answer, of course, is it depends. It depends on your team, your company culture. But if as a tech lead who manages 6, 7 people, 8 people, perhaps, if you're still coding, it's very likely that you're leaving behind some other key tasks that could make your team be better, more performant. So at the end of the day, you might stay 30% of your time coding, and those numbers are arbitrary. It's something that you will have to find yourself. But this is the average that I find in most teams. Another 30% is dedicated to alignment, meetings and meetings and meetings with your product owners and product managers, not only from your team, but from other teams in order to identify dependencies. Sessions with the other tech leads of the company to make sure you're all pushing in the same direction and you identify the different bottlenecks and you help each other. Management, stakeholders, product people, and so on and so forth. It's very common to hear technical leads say, the only thing I do is meetings and speaking with people. And that's actually right. That's what is expected, to speak, to make sure that we over communicate. This is especially important during this full remote stage that we're all living through. When you're working remote, over communicating is a must. So what do we do with the remaining 40% of our time? Basically, mentoring and empowering, making sure that your team members are the best they can be. Doing one-on-ones. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to do one-on-one sessions with your team members. Some people ask once a week, once every 2 weeks. Again, it depends on how you feel it. I typically do them once a week, always, and then have an always a door open policy all the time. So typically end up speaking twice, 3, 4, 5, even 5 times a week with my peers, but I always have one spot during the week that is my time for you. Now, the way I understand one-on-ones is this is a meeting not for the manager. but for the individual, for the contributor. It's a meeting that I'm there just to listen and support what they need or where they need help. It's not for me to get a report, not for me to ask, hey, what's the status of this project? It's a meeting for them, for the members of your team, to tell you how they're feeling, the problems they have, what is the situation, how they see the future, what they need to become better developers or better professionals, and so on and so forth. Review and pull requests is and reading the code of your team is a decent way, a nice way to stay in the code without being you the one contributing. Now imagine you have a key project, something that is very important for the company. It's a typical mistake to, as a tech lead, to take on that specific project or ticket or feature. Why? Because you would say, at the end of the day, I'm probably the developer with most years of experience, the one who knows the platform better, the ones who know all the nitty-gritty things on how to do it, and maybe I will do it faster. So it's natural to think, all right, I'll take care of this very critical thing, so I don't bother my team with it, and they can continue their work on something else. But I think that's a big mistake, because you would not be letting your team taking on the actually important things of the role, of the code or the functionality. It would be better. You would be better off letting your team deal with that, even if they make mistakes, but you're there to catch them when they fall. So that's the key. This mindset change I was mentioning that. Now, if you think about this rate, the 30-30-40, or the 20-20-60, or any other distribution that you feel comfortable with, they fully align with the focus that you should have in each of those columns. One is the focus on code, or because at the end of the day, code is the output of what you create. Or if you're in sales, the visits you do to your prospect clients, or if you're in marketing, the campaigns you put on your different channels, that's the actual output, the product you're working on. And it is important to keep at least a finger on that side. On the middle column, you have the people, which is the main the main power that you have, the main asset that you have, and then the process. So my question is, on a mid management position, which of the three you would say is more important? I'll give you 10 seconds to answer quickly on the Q&A. Code, people, or process? I have to make sure I don't move the slide so you don't see the answer. Okay. All right. So we almost have quorum on people. Let me get into something before I give you my specific thoughts on this. Now, should I focus on code conventions? Should I focus on the approvals on the pull requests? What is the API contract, the methods, all these specific APIs that we have to kind of measure a team? Or think about and ask ourselves as the whole team, do we have new ideas? And a safe area to propose new ideas without feeling terrorized by it. Do we have conflict avoidance? A safe culture? Do we have flow as engineers? Now, each of the columns responds to two of very different tasks that the managers, the mid managers have. And you actually have to focus on both. But on one hand, you have very tactical and short-termistic tasks that will help you with your daily operations. On the other one, you have a more long-term and strategic one, more strategical tasks. Now, depending on the size of your team and whether you are a manager of managers, your balance will be moving from short-term to long-term. So at the beginning, when you're a tech lead and you have 5 people in your team, but you still have one hand on the code, it's likely that more than half of your time will be tactical, will be on making those decisions and aligning those decisions with your team. Well, when you have a director level position and your team is actually 3, 4, 5 tech leads, you will start switching over to strategical decisions. So congratulations, most of you were right. Most of the focus will be on people, because people is the core, is the backbone of everything you do. I'm not saying you should not focus on code, you should not focus on process. And in fact, the more your team grows, the more the processes will be needed. Now, it's great that all of you, if I'm not all of you, say people. So that's awesome. But at the same time, is the biggest problem when an engineer moves up to an engineer manager position or a tech lead position. That's where we all struggle with, because we have never played in that role, and nobody teaches you how to become a people manager. Nobody teaches you either at college or when you're developing. Nobody tells you, hey, how do you work on your empathy? How do you really provide feedback that makes sense and that's useful? How do you create self-awareness to know, hey, these are my faults and these are my traits and this is where I struggle with? To provide motivation to your team, conflict resolution. This person is having a conflict with this other person, and I go and jump in the middle. How do I solve that problem? A lot of these elements here in this slide are kind of things of common sense that as we go through life, we face on our daily lives, but we seldom have a specific framework on how to work with that. So imagine you've been working on your technical skills forever, learning new programming languages, learning new frameworks, new methodologies, even new processes. You suddenly start working with hexagonal architectures, and then with agile methodologies, and then with the next best thing. But how do you learn all these specific skills that no one tells you they're there? And here's the secret: even when you do MBAs stuff and masters in business and whatnot, they don't teach you these things either. I wonder what they teach, but anyway. So those are things that you have to pick up yourself, typically by trial and error. But if I were to pick one, for me the most important would be self-awareness, because once you know yourself, once you know what you do well and what you don't do that well, you can be better prepared to work on the rest. So the second takeaway is that, well, when you become a tech lead, you have to work on your leadership skills and not so much on coding. It typically happens that they focus on, so now we have to move to this new language, to Golang or to Erlang or something else. So I will put 100% of myself or learning that new thing. And that's normal, because when you suddenly take the helicopter and start flying around and take this big picture, it's very common to fall into your comfort zone, which is coding. That's what makes you safe. And here's one secret: it actually happens to everyone. Imagine you are a director of technology or a director of marketing, and you get promoted to the CEO of a company. The typical thing is that you start digging specifically in the area you have control over. If you used to be the CMO, the chief marketing officer, the very first thing you're going to focus is on the marketing areas. In fact, if you're not careful, you would end up micromanaging them. If you are the CTO, or you were the CTO, and for reason A, B, or C, you become the CEO, the first thing you will look is at the technology side of the company. You will micromanage the technology, and you will forget inadvertently the rest of the departments of the company, which is incidentally where you need to work the most, because you didn't have that comfort with those areas. So with tech leads, with technical managers, it's exactly the same thing. We feel good with code. We feel good with what we've been doing all our lives, but we don't feel that good outside of our comfort zone on how do I give proper feedback and whatnot. And the goal is not to, your goal as a manager is not to write great code, is not to write bug-free code, is not to deploy the features into production. That is your team members' goals. Your goal is to make sure your team is the best and has everything to become the best. So some of you might have heard the concept of the 10x developer, right? This quintessential concept that came from Silicon Valley that says in software engineering, in software development, there is huge difference on the mindset and how a coder thinks and acts, that one developer can be 10 times more efficient than another. Therefore, it's so important to hire properly, mentor properly, and whatnot. Um, so it's a good goal to become a 10x developer. It's something that increases and forces you to become a better individual contributor. But based on my previous takeaway, your job as a tech lead is not to become the 10x developer. Is make sure that your team is 100, that you are a 100x tech manager. By doing small changes, by doing small things on your side, each of your developers can be a 10x developer. So I have my method on this is really simple. I call it the Sergio's framework on how to become a better tech lead. 3 steps. Step number 1: you read, and you read it, and that's about it. I cannot emphasize enough that you need to read as much as possible in team management, in team coordination, in business management, in psychology, sociology, everything that makes sense. And I can give you a few examples of books that really helped me through this process, not only for specific for technical roles, but also for non-technical, especially the one in the bottom right. But all in all, is read about what is about to be a technology, because no one teaches you. And since a lot of it is trial and error, you have to keep getting sources of it. And I'll speak later about the next element. Any questions so far? Any question until now? I want to do a quick stop before we go into deep topics. No questions? Okay, so somebody asks me on what to read first and what to read next. If you're into a very specific technical leader, the Gerald's book is a really good starting point, because it's very abstract and generic. Managing Humans is super easy to read, so those two would be nice ones to start. Then I would go into the Manager's Path. The Phoenix Project is a novel. It's really easy to read, especially if you're into DevOps, if you're a tech lead in the DevOps area. Just about a few months, I think, less than a year, the kind of the second part came out. It's called the Unicorn Project, and I really recommend it as well. I finished it a couple of months ago, and it's really good. But make sure that you don't read only things about technical management, that you also read things about self-awareness, empathy, feedback, and whatnot. I really like Radical Candor as a book. I don't put it here, but this is something that I enjoyed reading, on very specific on giving feedback. Managing yourself from Drucker is one of the top strategists and business leaders of our world. Is a very small book, but with lots of truth inside. So those would be my my selection. Of course, there's hundreds of books out there that you can choose. Another one that I could recommend is the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. That's really interesting on how teams work and the dynamics of teams work, and multicultural teams works as well. But there's plenty. Any other question? We good? Let me see. Okay, this is a very interesting question, that someone has been called a politician. Sorry to quote you verbatim, but it's true. It's true. The more you become a manager, the more you speak, the more you have to convince and influence people to do the things you need to happen. And as such, you kind of become a sort of politician. Depending on how your company culture works, it might happen that you have very specific things to do, and the people responsible to do that is not under your specific line of influence or line of command. So you will have to do a lot of influence, and influence typically gets confused with doing company politics. Now, for me, it's a very diffuse line, but also divergent. Doing politics typically means backstabbing. means doing things on the backs of people and telling someone to make sure that some other effect happens on the other side. Dirty politics, and in big corporations, this is unfortunately the day to day. But you don't really need to do this kind of politics to influence. For that specific thing, I would recommend the Dale Carnegie book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. This is a classic. It's a textbook for any MBA. Basically, it tells you that how transparency, candor, and honest feedback is important to these things. And there is a difference between how to say, when you are greeting someone, you can do it in a way that you want to get something in return, or you just do it honestly and create this relationship. So I think it's kind of normal, unfortunately, to become a little bit of a politician sometimes in this role, because you do need to get everyone on the same direction. And the more you grow in an organization, the more of a politician you need to be, the more you have to carefully thread your words, depending on who you're talking with, and how to win them, how to take them to your own field. Now, of course, this is very different from the engineering position. As one of the first things I said today, as an engineer, we tend to work with deterministic things that are very clear and very direct. And also, if we live in Europe, we are especially direct with these things. But that doesn't necessarily work in multicultural environments and when you're working with people. Sometimes arguments are rational, and sometimes arguments are emotional, and you cannot mix both. This happens not only in management, but in everything we see in life, even in Twitter conversations and with trolls and whatnot. You cannot win someone with an emotional argument. You cannot win them with rational arguments, and vice versa. You always have to be dialoguing in the same mindset on that side. Either you move the other person to that mindset, or you move yourself to the other one. Anyway, I'm divergent. I hope I answered your question. Otherwise, just let me know on the chat. So a few tools that I want to show on basically things that have helped me, and this is just an introduction. So I recommend you to look further on those tools, the ones that ring a bell the most, or that you think could provide more value. The first one is very key for software development professions, but also for those that require very specific amount of focus. And here's I call him Mihaly because it's impossible to say his surname, the flow concept. He has a really nice book explaining all this, and also I think a couple of TED Talks. Basically what he says is that in order to achieve flow, to achieve this moment of being super concentrated on something where everything seems to fly and you are in an ecstatic state of making things happen, you need to have the right amount of complexity and the right amount of skills. And if you don't have that, then you're going to fall through one of the cliffs of your side. So you will walk in a very narrow path with cliffs on both sides. And as a manager, your role is make sure that each of your team members gets this flow properly and is properly situated in this square. Now, what happens when you're working on something that has zero challenge, no challenge at all, and requires no skill? You end up in apathy. I'm talking about, hey, let's put boxes one on top of another. No challenge, no apathy, or at least no challenge for someone who, I don't know, has a doctorate or something like this. So you start moving up the skills in order to achieve better things. When you get more skilled, the apathy becomes boredom, because you know as a person that you can do more, you can do better. And the more you get your skills done, then you end up relaxing. So this is the typical flow of a junior developer. You get a new junior person in your team, you give him or her small, easy tasks until that person grows his skills or her skills. And at the beginning might not be working nice, and then starts growing skills until does that specific task perfectly and gets completely bored, and then super relaxed. And I'm sure you can see on people in the teams you've been working with, you can see and pinpoint specific persons through time on this role. Now, when someone is relaxed, then is the right time to increase the challenge, put something that's more difficult and maybe more critical for the company or for the team, until that person feels in control. And this is the typical situation in a company that has been running for some time and with a specific processes and whatnot. Most people will be in control. And in control means that you have the right amount of skills, you're not changing the world, you're not doing anything that will change the shape of the company, but you're doing exactly what you're told with the right skills in the time that you're supposed to deliver it. Depending on the type of person, you might want to push them up or down. So the more you push them in complexity, the more you help them take the leap, jump into the swimming pool, the more chances they will get into flow. So if we take the example of coding, when you're working on a very specific problem that you have never faced before, it's very typical to do a lot of trial and error. Keep trying, keep trying, keep trying. And that's when we developers put on our headphones and start coding. And after 3 hours, we realize we forgot to take lunch. And that is the state of flow. It's not easy. It's not trivial what we're doing. It requires to think in different ways of what we used to, and also push a little bit our skills to make sure we keep in this state of flow. Now, if we don't take care and the challenge is too complex for us or for our skills, then we will get aroused and eventually we will fall in anxiety. Now, anxiety is the typical thing that we see in new tech leads or new managers in the first months in their position, because it's such a big leap, such a big change that the challenge is too big for their skills. Yes, as managers who came from being developers, our skills in coding are great, potentially some of the best in the company or in the team, but those skills serve for nothing. So we have to identify those points and make sure that we either give them the skills or help them with the smaller challenges or mentor them or go together with them hand in hand on this role. Making sure you pinpoint your people in these metrics helps you identify where they are, how you can mentor them, and who is prone to leave eventually or burn down, or who is a raw diamond who can thrive. The second one is the type of leadership that you want to take. What is your role as a tech lead in the team? Do you want to be more micromanager, or do you want to give them full, absolute autonomy? Now, the answer is it completely depends on the state of the team, when they were formed, how they perform, and what is the situation. So the Hersey and Blanchard citational leadership is just a very simple experiment that you can do and even do together with your team on evaluating where we are and where do you need to be. Do you need to be more supportive, which is the y-axis, or do you need to be more task-oriented, which is the x-axis? So the first element, the first process is fully delegating, basically giving complete control over what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. Participate on those decisions. That's when you're there as one more team member. Selling, I know what to do, and I will convince you that that is the right thing. And telling, which is you do this. Now, typically what we know from management courses and experience is that the first block, the block here, the S1 block, telling people what to do is what does not work. It simply doesn't work because people want this autonomy, mastery, and capacity to do things themselves. So you want to situate yourself ideally in somewhere between participating and delegating. But in order to situate yourself there, you need to make sure you know your team the right way, and that your team knows what they have to do. Why is this? If you go straight for S4, because that's what management courses tells you, you have to fully delegate, but you don't have the right processes in place, your team members don't have the right skills, or you don't have a proper communication channel to make sure they understand the goals, what will happen is that they will do things, but most likely not what the company needs or what they need to strive. So it's a flow that you start quickly until they get to the nirvana here. It's not that you start here and S4 straight away. Right. The third element is the Eisenhower box. This is probably the most common one, or the one that people tends to know better, and it's for self-organization. So we are going from identify how your people is or where they are, identify how your team, how you want to behave with your team, and identify how you organize your time. The Eisenhower box, and it's attributed to Eisenhower, but it's not really 100% sure that he did this. But anyway, it's called like this. It's a super simple framework that asks you what I have to do is urgent or is not urgent. What I have to do is important or is not important. And you imagine that as 4 inbox cradles in your desk. And if something is important and urgent, you bloody do it now. If it's not urgent but it's important, you decide when to do it. What I do is just block block a slot in my calendar to do that specific thing. Right, I have to do this. I have to do it myself. It's not critically urgent to do it now or today. So maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day, maybe next week, I will block this 2 hours slot on my calendar, so no one can block me there in order to do this task. If something is not important, then either you delegate to someone, typically from your team or from other teams, or from an outsourced company, or delete it completely. If something is not important and not urgent, why do we have to do it? And you would be surprised how many delete things we end up doing on our daily basis. And the last tool is the stages of team development. This is a model that I typically use pretty much every single day to analyze what is the status of a team and put in your different teams, especially useful when you have different teams. When you have teams in different stages of development, you work with them in different ways. This is again more for managers of managers, but also useful to understand this model. You wouldn't work with the tech lead of a newly formed team the same way that you would work with an engineer manager that leads a team of 5 engineers that have been working together for 5 years. It would be completely different model. Okay. I have a really good point on the evaluating leadership, that the tailing method will work with junior developers and interns who are willing to be trained. And that is exactly right. That's precisely what I mean by this is a process. And this is not just you have to go into delegating because that is the right way to do. If you take a senior engineer who knows very well his trade and fully delegate on him and their product owners, probably you want to be here. Otherwise, that person will burn out or will complain that it has no autonomy or that you're a bad micromanager boss. But if you have an outsourced team on the other side of the world, and the scope of the problem is not really well defined, and the skills have pivoted in the last times, or you have a bunch of new junior developers and interns, typically you want to be here, and then slowly move those individual contributors over to selling, so they make sure that the decision is theirs. So really good point. Thank you, Pablo. I was saying that the Tuckman stages of team development, and again, mind that this is more of a model to manage teams of teams, but still to understand the situation your team is in. I don't know how many of you are Spanish or have Colacao in your markets. Internationally is called Nesquik, but Nesquik does not have this specific property, which is, so when you put the cocoa in your milk, typically you have to put it slowly, 1 spoon at a time. And that's because otherwise it becomes bubbly and you get clusters of cocoa instead of a nice, smooth distribution of the cocoa in your chocolate milk. So with teams happens exactly the same. I call it the cocoa effect and also the milkshake effect. Every person of your team is a completely different ingredient. They might have similar skills. They might develop in the same programming language. They're completely different people with different backgrounds, different experiences, and different ways of doing things. So even if you have a super tight team, any new addition will change the equation completely. Will change the flavor of your smoothie, of your milkshake, or will be difficult to create this hot chocolate. So when you're trying to create a team super quick, all of a sudden, and don't get me wrong, sometimes you have to do it. But when you do super quick, you will get clusters of cocoa, and you will get problems for sure, because people have uh, free will. We're humans, and we need time to create organic changes in order to work better. Now, Tuckman thought about this a lot and said, well, there's a first stage that is the stage of forming the team when we get together. Then the storming, where we fight each other on how we are and our discrepancies and divergences. And then we start norming, putting kind of written or non-written rules, because we start to know each other and what makes us tick, and we start norming the process. And once we have gone through those 3 steps, is when we start truly performing. When you have this dream team of people who just have to look to each other and identify what's going on in their minds, and they are super performant. And then typically you get an extra step. This one was added later. There's a jorin. Typically, teams have always a start and an end. It might be voluntary or involuntary. It might be that someone from the team decides to leave, or whatever other reason. But the most important ones are the first 4: forming, storming, norming, and performing. Now, of course, as you can imagine, your goal is to make sure your teams have a clear path over to performing. The same way that you would identify a career path for your team members, and you mentor them to become better. Looking at the team as a whole, you have these 4 steps of maturity. So your goal would be to become a performing team. Now, maybe you are in the norming stage and you have, I don't know, 4 people, and suddenly you hire 2 more people in your team. This means that you're automatically back to forming and storming, because those 2 new people joining the team will change a lot of things. And you want that's the magic of things, that every new person changes things ideally for the better. So if we're back to my analogy first, in companies typically we have to form teams very quick, and we get the cocoa effect, or we have tight teams that suddenly get someone new that changes the idiosyncrasy of our milkshake, or the flavor of it. And ideally, we hire the right people, because if you have a nice juice with citrics and suddenly you put something that doesn't fit in there, maybe that ingredient would perform super good in another team, but destroys your team. Hence the importance of hiring. So identifying your team in the different stages is key. And there is not a specific timing that you spend in each phase. It completely depends on your people, on your company culture, how well you do onboarding, how well you do your internal processes, and how structured those processes are. If you are in a chaotic environment where everyone goes their own way and there is no process, it's more difficult than when someone lands on a team where everyone does, for example, agile, and there are clear roles and definitions, and the onboarding is smooth, and it's very easy to set up their development environment, blah, 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 all these kind of things. So you can do things to reduce the gap between one step and the other. But again, identifying where your team lives in each moment. So the third and last takeaway is that you need to learn, you need to read a lot and discuss about leadership. And we will talk about why discussing leadership. But you also need to practice, like with everything else. If you work with developers, we do katas, we train our skills, we learn new code and languages. But how you train and practice your leadership skills without training in the field, which is the typical situation. You test, you measure, and you improve. Sometimes you try something and you evaluate the result of that, and then you keep learning with it. But at the same time, and here's the bad news, every company is different. Every situation is different. And unfortunately, there is no blueprint. There is no magic recipe on how to be a good manager. And I myself continue to screw up every day with many things because, well, we are not deterministic. We're humans. And sometimes we have good days. Sometimes we have bad days. So the frameworks, all these tools, and all the books that I've presented and the others that are out there are helpers, are your companions to make the best job possible, but nothing guarantees that you will not make mistakes. In fact, you will make mistakes every day. And if I take with me my toolbox to a new company and try to apply exactly the same thing, it will probably fail because every situation is different. So you need to adapt very quickly. and learn and reflect a lot. How do you do that? You'll ask. Well, you need time. And how can you need time if time typically is the most precious resource from a manager? That we look at our calendars and it's fully booked by staff. But at the end of the day, you need time. You need time for planning. So a specific moment during your week where you sit down with your calendar and your tasks and your goals, long-term and short-term, and you put them properly arranged instead of just running quick as quick as possible ahead of you. So you need to plan time for planning, and you need to plan time for thinking and for reflecting, just to think about what's going on. Am I doing a good job? I am not doing a good job. Maybe talk with a mentor, ideally, if you have one. But time where you don't have any fire burning you out, and where you can just think about what is going on. And this is crucial. I cannot repeat and emphasize enough. It's crucial that every week you set aside at least 1 hour of being quiet, chill, relax, and thinking about yourself, thinking about these things. Do it any way you want, but make sure you block that time, because if you don't, you will burn out and you will not learn from your mistakes. How are we doing on time? Yeah, bad. I'll speed up a bit. Time to catch up with your team members as well. The official one-on-ones that typically will be on the schedule, but also on official sessions where you get a complete different context of what's going on. So it can be going out for lunch or beers on Thursdays or Fridays, anything you want, and make sure you have time for that, but also for unplanned meetings. And plan time for coding. I say 30% before, it could be 20, it could be 15, it could be just trying out something different. But if, as a technical lead, of course, this affects only to tech leads and technical engineers. If you completely lost track of the code, you're done, because there's a downward spiral from there, and you will not be able to come back. So make sure you also have some time for do a proof of concept with a new language, review some code from your team, try out something different. Again, something that's not critical or not key or has not a specific deadline, but something that helps you keep at least one finger on the code. But you need time. And sometimes the how they say, the trees don't let us see the forest. And we have meetings over meetings and after meetings and after meetings. Remember the Eisenhower box? Sometimes you're not needed in that meeting. Sometimes that meeting doesn't need to happen. But if you can set aside 1 hour a week just to think and reflect, that would be awesome. It might work in the early mornings for you. It might work in the late evenings. It might work nice at home with a glass of wine, whatever works for you. But make sure you reflect on those things. I will go quickly over the pitfalls of a tech lead, because it's not easy, especially the first time you do it. And because it's full of trade-offs. The first one is that you tend to feel alone. When you become a manager, it's really easy to not belong. You are not one of us anymore. Now you're a manager. You're not a rightful member of the team, because now you control our performance bonuses or our salary raises. You control our tasks. You can defend us, and you can decide not to do it. So you can have a lot of rapport with your team and get along well with them and even be friends. But you're not one of the crew anymore. Yeah, now you're the manager. You have to deal with uncertainty, and you'll have to make decisions where you seldom have all the information. Maybe you put the bar on having 80% of the information, 90%, 60% of the information, but you will have to make decisions with lots of uncertainty, and then live with those decisions, even when you screw up. You will have to decide based on that, based on the previous thing. You'll have to decide between the worst and the bad. So sometimes there is no right answer. Sometimes there is no win. Sometimes if you do A, this team will be angry. If you do B, this other team will be angry. Sometimes you even have to make tough calls, hard decisions that are not good, but that's part of the role, and you will be the bad guy. No, not a way around it. So you need to sleep good at night and be at peace with yourself on that side, and make sure that you make the right ethical decision that's aligned with your values. And again, people is complicated. We cannot be tested. We cannot do people-driven development or anything like this, unfortunately, or not that I know of. Every person is different every day, and we evolve as well as humans. So you need to make sure that you understand that situation, that sometimes today is not the right moment to speak with this guy or that girl, and tomorrow might be. And mind that you're not successful. You're successful when you are not needed anymore. A tech lead that has mentored their team properly, has given them full delegation, autonomy, and mastery, and has taken them to the next level, that team suddenly becomes fully autonomous, and you're not needed anymore. And if you're not needed anymore, it means that you can either go and relax in the bit or take on the next challenge where you will need all these learnings from before. So the key takeaways from today: not a vertical change, it's a horizontal one. You have to work specifically on your leadership skills by reading, by using frameworks, by using tools, and by testing a lot and practice a lot, speaking with other managers. Find a mentor and find a community of other tech leads. Ideally, the rest of the tech leads from your company or the rest of the managers from your company, because you are also a team, the leadership team. So that's all I have. Now we have some time for questions. I have actually one question here. I'll answer in a minute. Once we finish, please answer the survey from BTS. And now is the time that we have, like, say, 10, 15 minutes or so for some questions. So I have one question here. As a tech manager, must you continue coding? And the answer is, it depends. Definitely, you cannot continue coding like you were doing before. You should not code on critical or mission critical tasks, but you should be there with your team, and you should keep one finger on the code. Now, depending on the size of your team, the complexity of the team, the size and culture of your company, it could go from 0 to something like 20, 30%, 50% if some factors are happening. But if you're coding all of the time, you're definitely missing out on the actual role of the tech lead, because it means that you're not putting proper attention in the management side of things. You're not learning how to give constructive feedback. You're not doing proper one-on-ones. You're not thinking in advance for long-term strategical things. You're focused on the code, and it's natural. It is natural because that is our comfort zone. Coding, doing things ourselves, and making sure that it happens, right? Is the old adagio of if you want to do something, if you want something happening, make sure you do it for yourself, right? But that's a fallacy. It's not right, because if that is the case, you will have two hands and one brain, so you can do so much. It doesn't matter how smart you are, but if you have 5 pairs of hands and 5 brains that are ideally better than yours and that can be empowered, that's how you become the 100x team. And imagine if you have a team of 1x developers and you get 5x performance. If you have a team of 10x developers, thanks to your mentorship, then you can get a 100x performance out of that team. This is a fallacy, so don't take it word by word, because, as you know, doubling your team size doesn't double your output. But you get my point. I think it's in short, I think it's important to continue coding a little bit and make sure you do paid programming, some paid programming with your teams in order to identify when and where they get blocked, where they need help. Because at the end of the day, you will be most likely the old devil in the team. But it is absolutely possible to be a tech lead of a team in a technology that you have never used before. Maybe you've been a Java developer for all your life and you become the tech lead of a Ruby team, and that's perfectly fine. You will be the old devil that manages that. Hope I answered your question. All right, here we have, how important is to learn from and share experiences with your peers and other team managers, and how we create these peer-to-peer connections. It's adamant, it's critical. It's probably one of the most important things that you can do, because that is your support group. You remember, one of the things I put here is that you feel alone. Unfortunately, this does not get better as you grow in the ranks. You will be feeling more and more alone because sometimes you have to make decisions that are bad or not so good for the team. So having this support group, to have someone over your shoulder helping you, or at least giving you some help on that side, is critical. In a group of tech leads or in a group of mid managers in a company, you will have people in different maturity levels as well on that role. You will have someone who has been taken on that role for many years and someone that's taken on the first position. So creating a system of mentor and mentoree typically helps with this, and also create a group on this team. Now, let me go quickly. Sorry, I don't like to do this on the slides because typically puts my head around. But in this slide, the black guys here, the tech leads, they are also a team. And actually, I should put a circle around them. It's not that they are only in their teams. Suddenly, when you get this role, you're not thinking only on your own silo or thinking on your own cluster. You're not anymore the lead of the backend team or the lead of the customer support functional area. You're suddenly one of the managers of the company that needs to go horizontally across all the areas, because your team by itself will not make the company strive. It's all the teams together. So you kept switching your hat. Your hat where you go to your team members and review one pull request and explain them why you should not put a huge switch in here and make an abstract factory. And then suddenly you change the hat and start talking architecture with your peers on the front end side to make sure you develop the right API for their needs. So this group is another team by itself. In some companies, they call that guilds as well, right? You have the front end guild, you have the back end guild, and you have the managers guild. But it's a team, and that team is the one that drives the company. So that is that is one of the ways that I tend to use and make sure this team is also a team that runs with the same framework of the TechNet stages. The first time you create your team of tech leads, every person will be in a different maturity level, but the team as a whole will be forming, then storming, then norming, and then performing. And when you have a team of engineer managers that are performing, that, my friends, is magic. First, because you don't need a CTO. They can drive the company technology by themselves like this, and maybe the CTO can focus on something else, M&A, strategy, just do nothing. But that's magic. Of course, that takes time, and by time I mean years. So yeah, those things to do this. Is Agile really such a big deal? All right, we go with the big guns on questions. I think Agile helps you. Agile for me has one big benefit. That is, small problems as early as possible. Say that is not the only way to do it, and this is definitely not bulletproof for developing software. And there's nowadays there's a lot of criticism on how Agile has evolved from something that was created from developers by developers and something that has gone into the business side, and now we have certifications and all this kind of yada stuff. But I want to enter on that discussion. For me, it's more about the kind of culture that you want to put on your team. And Agile does one thing very well, that is create ownership on the teams. So as a tool to create ownership and support your team members to make this differentiation we talked before on what we do and how we do it between product and technology, it tends to be really useful in that situation. I don't think it works by itself. So it's not that we put Agile principles such as X, Y, Z, or the flavor that you like, whether it's Kanbans, Scrums, and you name it. It doesn't work by itself. Agile doesn't work if you don't have a proper technology subset of frameworks that go alongside with it. Continuous delivery or continuous integration, testing, and so on and so forth. This would be a topic for another webinar. But Agile is inherently a management technique or a management framework that you can adapt to go alongside your technology processes. It's a process, and as such, it has to be adapted to your own needs. Most people in the world use a Scrum, but right? We do Scrum, but with this differentiator. I seldom use. I think I've never done in my life a Scrum by the book, but each company adapts to its situation. As I said, is a pretty decent tool both for managers, for technical managers, and for tech leads, and for Scrum masters and product owners to align people. It works really well with the OKRs on that side to complete the circle, and so on and so forth. Hope I answered your question. How are we going on time? I think we have time for one more question or two. Any last question? All right, so let's call it a day. I hope you guys learned something today and got some takeaways either for your management positions today or for the future. I hope you enjoyed. And yep, it was a pleasure to be here with you. Please answer the survey and have a great weekend in the whichever phase of the lockdown you're on. Bye, everyone.